We're going to take a brief overview of the idea of the end times, the last days, without getting real specific. I just putting out a timeline here so that we can get a rough idea of what I'm talking about. Um, this timeline here shows about 2,000 years ago, Jesus died on the cross, was raised from the dead, and went up into heaven. Um, and then we have about 2,000 years of history. We're coming up on the year 2020. Um, and so I believe that we are getting near to this idea where the sign in the heavens, the sun, moon, and the stars um, event takes place that kind of closes out the idea of the last days and then runs into the idea of the day of the Lord, where Jesus is going to rule and reign with a rod of iron. This small transition period here, I believe if you follow the narration of Revelation and when you read it in conjunction with Matthew chapter 24, that you see a period of tribulation against the church from Satan, and then the resurrection of the church by God going up into the heavens, and then the rest of Revelation is God then beginning to rain down judgment against the wicked for the tribulation, for the persecution that they have done to his saints. I believe that is the overall timeline. And so I'm getting my overall idea from Peter, where he talks about 1,000 years being as a day. I may be taking that too literally, but I think it does paint a picture for us to at least get an idea of what Scripture I think is the overall picture that Scripture is painting. So when I see last days, I'm thinking days as in 2 ages or roughly 2,000 years. When I'm seeing day of the Lord, I'm looking at age or 1,000 years, which in Revelation 20 here is described, the time period that Satan is locked away. I would also look at Adam, when God said, when you eat of it, in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. I would submit that there's another picture there that Adam died before he was 1,000 years old. Again, I may be taking all that a little bit too literally, but I think it's an interesting picture, and I think it does kind of give us a time frame, or at least a point of reference. 1,000 years from now, who knows? I could be very wrong. We'll have to wait and see. So anyway, we're getting close to this time where I believe the last days will be ending, and that this sign in the heavens is going to appear, and then the beginning of the day of the Lord. And once this day of the Lord begins, as I stated, I believe that it lasts really for an eternity. But it is what I call about 1,000 years of transition. We're going from the age of man, the time of man, to the age of the Lord, and by the end of this 1,000 years, you see in Revelation, Gog and Magog is destroyed, and then you see the judgment, the great white throne judgment. All those who are not found in the book of life, they are cast into the lake of fire. And then it talks about the end of Revelation talks about the city of God coming down to the earth, and that is after 1,000 years. So when people refer to the end times, this is generally the period that they're looking at, and then we just kind of assume, well, we know this other stuff is going to happen as well. But generally, when people say, "Oh, the end of the world and everything," this is the time frame that is generally looked at, and the things that are generally seen as scary is this tribulation period and this retribution period, where you have warfare and persecution and famine and things like that seemingly happening, and then I believe is then separated by this resurrection point here. And then once the righteous have been transformed, raised from the dead, and taken up into the heavens, then God begins to rain down judgment in fire. And really, this retribution, if you want to think of it, it really it continues this whole time period, because once the sign in the heavens opens up, Jesus rules with a rod of iron, and then it ends again in fire here with Gog and Magog being destroyed by fire, and then it also ends in fire after the judgment in the lake of fire. So once the day of the Lord begins, retribution really does continue. Really, you could say into eternity, because it seems clear in Scripture that this is an everlasting fire. And so we are in this time period here, an age of mercy and grace, where the Lord is delaying his time of retribution and judgment. And this is really what our message needs to be, that we are in an age of grace, that the Lord is being merciful, that he is slow to wrath. And when his wrath does come, it is going to be fierce, and like I said before, it really never ends. It really continues once everything is kind of set up. The thing is it just doesn't happen in one moment in time. I think that may be what's confusing. I try to generalize that. Look, when the Lord appears, that it's all over. You know, wicked human beings, you're toast. But in reality, it is a step-by-step process where there's still given time and space throughout this period until you get to this lake of fire. And so it isn't just one big swift, he's coming and then boom, you're done. It unfolds over time. So just real quick review. We've had about 2,000 years of history from time of Jesus until about now. We're looking for this time of the sign of the heavens. That's when we know our redemption draws near. We'll see him. We'll be like him. That will trigger the resurrection, because what you've seen is this tribulation against the church, and really that has started from day one, and it seems to just intensify all the way up until this moment. And so that's where I would say the historists, those that kind of believe Revelation's already started, I think they can have a good point that really this tribulation has been going on since that Jesus was on the cross. And then you have this resurrection, which will happen at this point here when the heavens are rolled back. All the earth will see him. And they'll weep and mourn, but we'll be looking up for redemption, the resurrection, the redemption of our body. And then begins this retribution that continues, like I said, very harshly when the bowls and the trumpets and things like that are poured out at the beginning of the day of the Lord, but then it really continues for the full 1,000 years because he's ruling with a rod of iron. And then even at the end, when Satan is released out of his prison, there's fire on Gog and Magog, and then after the judgment, there's the lake of fire. So just wanted a quick overview of that time period that I'm talking about. What I believe Jesus' parables are really referencing this whole 3,000-year time period, that when Jesus talks about, the resurrection, in Daniel, when he mentions the resurrection, you have the first resurrection and the second resurrection. And so in one fell swoop, you're looking at a 1,000-year time frame difference just in that one sentence. But I just wanted to have this as kind of an overview of this large span of time to get there's just some of these basic ideas of the last days, the day of the Lord being broken up by the sign in the heavens, and then the flow down here of tribulation, resurrection, and retribution. All of these things then culminating in the lake of fire. And that's all I got.